entrepreneurs remain shadowed. Here, I team up with these hidden talents to unveil their challenges and successes. Dive in with me to unearth entrepreneurial gems, learn from our experiences, and get educated. I want to welcome Alan Stein Jr. here to the show. Buddy, thank you so much for being here and being gracious with your time. Super excited to have you. You came by unbelievable referral from an old business partner of mine who was on the show actually, in the very beginning, Stu Saunders. Yeah, Stu's been on the show. So Alan, welcome to the show.
Well, it's so great to be with you. I think the absolute world of Stu, and anyone he gives a ringing endorsement to, I know it's somebody I'd like to meet and someone I'd like to have a conversation with. And that is certainly you, my friend. So this should be a fun chat.
Thanks. He actually texted me. He's like, dude, you gotta have Alan on the show. And I was like, okay, done. Like it was just I didn't even, yeah, it was for sure. But so for the audience, just so we frame this conversation, it doesn't go off into la la land. Guys, Alan is a professional speaker, author, and performance coach. And you really, I'll just kind of I'll kind of give the high levels and then you can fill in the gaps as you feel necessary. But you were going to become a teacher. And really, I think the motivation to become a teacher was to really become a basketball coach inside education. And so you had a situation that happened that, took you away from teaching and then brought you directly into basketball strength and conditioning coaching. Then you got an opportunity to work with Nike and developing their next kind of stream of sponsored athletes, if you will. And it's amazing the list of people that you've worked with: Kevin Durant, Kobe Bryant, Steph Curry. I think, probably for sure 3 of the most notable. There's probably another half dozen. And then you went out into the speaking world and now you do work, performance training and speaking with corporations. And so I'm super excited to have you on the show. You just so the audience knows and we can put in perspective the depth of Alan's experience here is like he's worked with Pepsi, Sonic, Starbucks, American Express, Under Armour, Charles Schwab, Spotify, like the list goes on. And I mean, when you look at the list, it's like hundreds, but those are like some of the predominant ones. So welcome to the show, man.
No, I appreciate it. And thanks for such a thoughtful intro. And, the first thought that comes to mind is you're giving my intro is just how grateful I am. I've kind of had 2 separate, but still kind of inextricably linked careers, one in basketball and one in speaking, and just how grateful I am for the opportunities I've had, the experiences I've had, the people I've had a chance to work with and work alongside and work for, the impact they've had on me and the things they've taught me. I've had a really good journey, and I just turned 49 a couple of weeks ago, so I'm knocking on the door of 50 years old, and the optimist in me, and I say this with all sincerity, I really believe I'm only at the halftime of my life. I believe I'll live a vivacious 100 years, and so my goal is to really take all of the lessons that I've learned during the first 50 years, which has been a real fun ride, and apply those to the next 50 years to make sure that my next 50 is my best 50. And I want to do that in every area of my life. I want my physical, my mental, my emotional, and my spiritual wellness to just continue to get better. And again, the optimist in me really believes that even though I've had some incredible experiences and done some really cool things, my best days and my best experiences are still in front of me. But really what ties everything together that you just shared, I'm just overwhelmed with gratitude and gratefulness that I was able to have some of these experiences, and I look forward to making more.
It's funny that you bring that topic up because I just turned 54. And so like I'm right at the, 55, bit of a number, but I feel the same way. Like I feel like, we're just winding up a whole new chapter in our life, my wife and I, and, buying a new business in a new industry, which is not uncommon for us. We've had more than several, but it's like, I'm so driven to just do more because it's like, I always say to people, it's like, I feel like, I'm the kid that got the keys to the Ferrari and now I actually know how to drive it and get the most performance out of it. So why would I stop now? And so there's a lot of people out there that I speak to because I'm in that age category, and they're like, wow, why aren't you winding down and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm like you, I'm blessed to be able to play this game of business and take it to its fullest and just get better and better at it. That doesn't mean I want to work 80 hours a week anymore necessarily. I think part of your experience should lend to some intelligence of how to do things in a way where your business doesn't own you, versus you owning the business, and it works for you and you work for the people in it, really more so.
Absolutely. Well said. For me, one of the biggest shifts that I've made specifically in the last several years, but kind of been in transition over the last, decade or so is my North Star, my ultimate goal has actually changed. And, for my 20s and 30s, and to be quite honest, even early part of my 40s, that North Star was what I would call success. And I put that in air quotes, because I was actually using a lot of external metrics to define my own success. And they're the standard ones that pretty much everyone uses, accomplishments and accolades and how much money you can make and those types of things. Whereas now I've shifted that North Star. And I'm not saying that those things aren't important. I'm not saying that we shouldn't use them as drivers. But what I've shifted to is my North Star now is about fulfillment. My North Star is about satisfaction and enjoyment and feeling a sense of significance and contribution. And the ultimate dictator of that for me is quality of life. So right now, that's what's most important to me, is that I'm doing work that I love and find meaning in and feel like I'm making a difference in the world. But I'm also doing it at a pace that's conducive to the life that I want to be living. So I'm not working 80 hours a week. I'll be the first to tell you. And that's by choice. And once again, I don't say that with an ounce of judgment. If anyone watching or listening right now is choosing to work 80 hours a week, by all means, do you. I think we each need to be able to define what we consider our North Star and then work backwards and build a life that's around that. And right now, I work very hard at my craft, the speaking craft. And I put a lot into it for me and for my clients and for my audiences. But I don't work 24/7. I've created space in my life for my own fitness and wellness because that's something that really fills my bucket. I've created space and grace to spend time with my children because they're at very impressionable ages now as they're all at the beginning of their teenage years. I've got space while I'm not currently in a romantic relationship. I've created space that when I do meet that person, there'll be room for me to pour into a relationship. So I have the different areas of my life and where I'm so grateful right now, as I said, knocking on the door of 50 years old, I'm starting to find my groove in each of those spaces. And I'm getting better at this. I mean, I say this with humility, but with a huge smile. This past year was my best year as a father. It was my best year as a speaker, not financially my best year, but as far as the craft of getting better at the craft, I'm getting better at it. This past year it was my best, I'll say, fitness and wellness year. Now, that doesn't mean that I can do things in my 50s that I could do when I was 20, but it means based on my age, I am as healthy and as fit as I have ever been in my entire life. So the reason I say those things is I'm moving in the right direction. I'm not finished working on myself as a father, working on myself as a speaker, working on my health and fitness. I'm not complacent in those areas, but I do like the direction that I'm going. And to me, that's what's most important. And for me, my new definition of success is, am I living the type of life that I want to live? Am I doing things I want to do with people that I want to do them with? And basically, am I calling the shots? So to use your analogy, do I have the keys to the Ferrari, or have I given them to someone else? And I want to make sure that I'm the one that has the keys and that I'm the one that's driving this. And then, if and when that North Star starts to shift, or my quality of life, I want it to shift in another direction in a few years, then I'll shift then. But right now, I'm just starting to hit my stride, which, after 5 decades, it's about time.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, okay, so it's funny that you say that. And I mentioned to you at the very beginning of the show that I don't show up with questions. And most of my listeners know that I don't show up with questions either. But as you were just talking about this, the thing that kind of popped in my head was like, you've had an interesting journey where at the very beginning of your journey, you were going to become a teacher. And that kind of got sidelined. And I'm curious, like, I always like, myself and my mastermind group, we often will say, like, can you you could never have planned how your life ended up where it is today. Like it just is, you could never do it. And like all the experiences and all the things that happen. But I'm curious, like, as you have been explaining, like, where you are today and that pathway, and how has that changed along the ways? And specifically, I guess, like, how did you overcome, the darkest of days? And I mean, and I know that you speak on a lot of these topics anyway, so we'll probably get into, some of your messaging, which I really want to do. But I'm curious, like, how have you used your past? Maybe the question is how have you used your past experiences to create content and deliver to people to help them through some of their darkest days, or some of the things where they think I can't help but think, and I know, sorry, I'm drawing on here, but
No, this is great.
I can't help but think, like, I see so many kids, or I see people who get into a job and then they're like, man, this is what I want to do. And then fear creeps in to not make the next move and step out of their comfort zone, or whatever the story is. And so I'm just curious how that showed up in your life.
Man, a lot of good stuff right there.
Yeah,
These will be very long and thoughtful conversations, and I love it. My immediate response, because I want to address this first, and then I'm going to slowly kind of unpack a few things. But to that person that you just mentioned that is listening right now, the most important thing I can say is to look directly in the camera and just say, it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. Give yourself some grace and some space to be less than perfect. Give yourself some grace and space to feel whatever it is that you're feeling, even if whatever you're feeling is not preferred. I don't think anyone prefers to be angry or frustrated or annoyed or overwhelmed or upset. But we have those emotions for a reason, and I encourage folks to lean into them. I also want to make sure that it's crystal clear that everything I share on stage, everything I share on page, and everything I'm sharing with you right now, I'm not coming from a place of mastery. I'm not at the top of the mountain looking down, preaching to people and telling them what they should be doing. Now, what I can say with a huge smile, and again, more gratitude, is that I've made a lot of progress in these different areas. But the reason that I've made progress is because almost every single thing that I share right now, I did the exact opposite of those things in my 20s, 30s, and even in my early 40s. So I've had to learn a lot of these lessons the hard way, the school of hard knocks. Many of the things I preach today, for example, one of the main tenets that I preach, both to my corporate audiences and to my own children, is to refrain from blaming, complaining, and making excuses. I'm a big believer in the concept of extreme ownership, which Jocko Willink wrote a brilliant book on it. But I hold myself responsible and accountable for everything in my life. And I fully recognize that I don't control external circumstances, but I always control my response to them. So I do the best that I can to spend as little time worried about or upset about things outside of my control. And I focus on what is in my control, which is my response. And I work really hard for my response to never be blaming, complaining, or making excuses. But the reason I share that is if you and I had this conversation 20 years ago, I was the king of blaming, complaining, and making excuses. Anytime something didn't go my way, or I didn't reach a goal, or things didn't meet my preferences, it was always someone else's fault. It was never my fault. And the reason I share that is I tried a certain operating system, if you will, as I navigated life through my 20s and 30s. And it never left me feeling whole. It never left me feeling fulfilled. I always felt empty. I always felt less than. I never felt worthy. So I finally, after several decades, decided to switch that operating system, give myself a reboot, and start to approach life in a different way. And so these things that I'm sharing now, I'm sharing with the zealots of a recent convert, of someone who's done things the other way for a long time and it never really worked. So now I'm trying it a different way. And I always want to put that into context, because the person that's watching or listening to this right now that's struggling or feeling overwhelmed or feeling like whatever, I promise you I've felt that. At some point in my life, I have felt exactly like you are. So the reason I share these things is to hopefully encourage you to give some thought to trying some different things. And that's really it. But one last thing that I'll say, and then I know this was kind of a long answer. The single piece of best advice that I was ever given, I was very fortunate to get when I was in middle school. And I had a coach tell me that the key to high performance, the key to productivity, the key to fulfillment is to find your strength zone. And your strength zone is the intersection between something you're naturally pretty good at and something that you really love to do. And you just need to find where those 2 points intersect. And for me, for most of my life, that point of intersection has revolved around the game of basketball. Basketball, I've seen from every angle. I've seen from the playing angle, I've seen from the coaching angle, and now I see from the parenting angle because all 3 of my kids play basketball.
Oh,
But
cool.
basketball has always been one of my biggest passions. And, in my younger years, I was a decent enough player and something I love to do. So when those intersected, that was my strength zone. And some of my most fulfilling moments in my life have been as a basketball player. And then when I realized that I no longer had the talent to play the game professionally, I needed to make a switch. So I switched to becoming a basketball performance coach, something I was naturally fairly decent at, the ability to communicate and teach and motivate, but something I was very passionate about. So my point of intersection moved a little bit, but it still met the 2 criteria of something I love and something I'm good at. When I started to experience some burnout in basketball, that's when I decided to become a corporate keynote speaker. Once again, it still met the 2 requirements. Keynote speaking is something I love to do, and it's something that I've worked on my craft to become fairly decent at it. So it's still meeting that requirement. And to me, as long as I still follow that recipe for the next 50 years of my life and can find a way to spend time, significant time and energy within my strength zone, then I'll continue to feel that sense of fulfillment. But I just wanted to make sure that I painted the full picture that all of this is stuff that I've learned and stuff that I'm not done working on yet.
It's interesting. You made a comment about like an old operating system and now a new operating system. I'm curious if we can expand on like the old operating system, because as you were talking there, I was thinking there's people who are either driving or whatever, however they're listening to the show, and they don't know what's wrong, but they know something is wrong. They know that they're not fulfilled. They don't have joy. I've been there. I absolutely have been there. They don't live in a place of joy. They have a hard time accessing it. They're not aware of what it is that is impacting them. And I'm curious if you don't mind sharing your story a little bit about that old operating system that you had and how it affected you. And like in the two things that just kind of popped in my head was, one, you just mentioned that, you were hoping to become a professional basketball player and make that your thing, and then realized, okay, I'm not good enough to do this, so I'm going to become a strength and conditioning coach, which I would imagine it's a total hallucination, but that could have been a dark time for anybody in their lives where they're trying to go, well, they try to do something and they were so passionate about it, which clearly you are. And then when they don't get there, there's a reinvention. And sometimes, there could be depression, there could be all kinds of things before that reinvention. And then the other one was, when you were becoming a teacher in order to coach, and then realize, okay, this is not any. So I'm curious if you could just maybe expand on that so that those who are in the space that you're talking about can maybe identify what is causing that or what their operating system might be just by you sharing your story.
Sure. Well, let me touch on a couple of the big pillars of my previous operating system. And these are the things that I'm still working on today, but boy, have I made some great progress. One was when I was growing up, and part of this was societal, part of this was the specific household that I grew up in, but the failure was the second F word, if you will. Failure was to be avoided at all costs. You hedged your bets and you did everything possible to make sure you didn't fail the test or the exam. You didn't get cut from the team. You didn't ask a girl out to prom and she said no. So you did whatever you could do to mitigate failure. And what I found is by having that as my part of my operating system is I created a lot of self-imposed limiting beliefs, and I aimed really low because I figure if I aim low, I have a higher chance of hitting. So that means, you didn't ask out the prettiest girl that you could ask out to prom. You would ask out someone that you thought more was in your league, I guess you could say, because you would decrease the chance of feeling failure or rejection. And what I've learned is now I'm trying to break through that. I'm trying to expand. I'm trying to set unbelievably lofty goals in every area of my life. And I've learned to be okay with not reaching them. I'm okay with setting an incredibly high standard and goal and giving it everything I've got, but falling a little bit short of that. So I no longer look at failure as the be all end all, that the game's over and there's no reset button. I now look at failure, and I don't even really use that word anymore, other than the context of conversations like this. I just look at them as learning opportunities or setbacks. Like, hey, I tried to do this, it didn't quite work. Oh, well, what can I learn from that? And how can I try again? Or how can I pivot and do something adjacent to this that might put me in a better direction? So I no longer look at failure as this big be all end all. In fact, I'm getting more resilient to it. As a professional speaker, my goal is to do 50 paid speaking engagements per year, and that is my primary business model. Well, for anyone out there that is not a professional speaker, let me let you in on a little secret. If my goal is to get 50 yeses, I'm probably getting 150 to 200 no's every year. Like, I'm getting a lot of no's in order to get those yeses. And so I hear, no, we're going with another speaker. No, we don't think your message is the right fit. Or being ghosted, that becomes the norm. And where, 10, 15 years ago, those little micro failures would have paralyzed me. They would have upset me for days on end. And now I can quickly move to the next play because I just quickly reframe it as, okay, this didn't work out. Let me go search for the next opportunity. So part of it has been my relationship with the word failure and how I choose to process it. And what that's done is it's helped me expand and get rid of some limiting beliefs and aim much higher. That's part of the equation. Very similar to this is I also grew up with a scarcity mindset, a mindset that there was, a finite amount of resources, and instead I've now tried to rewire myself to have much more of an abundant approach. And I try to use this in every area of my life. Certainly I use it financially, but I also use it, I'm single, I'm in the dating world. Previous me, if I had shown interest in someone and then that didn't quite work out, I would start to feel constricted. I would start to feel like, oh my gosh, she was so amazing and I can't be with her. Oh, I don't know if there's anyone else out there for me. And that, once again, is an anxious, paralyzing approach. Now, if there's someone I'm super interested in and it doesn't work out, sure, I might be bummed for a little bit, but I believe there's somebody else right around the corner that could be equally awesome and a great fit for me. So this mindset that there is abundance in every area of our life is something I'm getting much better at. Now, I still occasionally revert back to my old operating system. I'll still occasionally get bummed out when I don't get the speaking engagement or if I get ghosted on one of the dating apps. But what's happening now is I'm only bummed out for a matter of minutes or hours as opposed to a matter of days or weeks. Like I'm just much more resilient. And that's probably the biggest change to my operating system now, is that level of awareness. And when I do feel myself reverting back to old ways, when I do find myself, bothered by any of those circumstances, I don't resist or suppress or ignore those emotions. I feel them. I allow myself to feel how I'm feeling. So I don't feel guilty about feeling bad about not getting a speaking engagement, because that will only make things worse. Instead, I give myself the grace and space to say, yeah, you really wanted that speaking engagement. It didn't come through. You're allowed to be bummed out about it. And what I found is just giving myself that space and permission, it still usually just runs through me fairly quickly. Usually by the next morning, I'm totally fine, back to my old self, focused on the next one. So this kind of concept of next play has been an absolute game changer for me.
So where did you learn? And I'll just take the one from scarcity to abundance, because I really am a strong believer in this. And I think a lot of people don't know that they're in a scarcity mindset. They don't know that they see life as a limited place versus an unlimited place. And so I'm really curious on your path to growing and identifying and how you built the awareness. And was it like a light bulb, or was it or was it a building blocks, and how long it took, and what were some of the struggles along the way, so that we can help listeners identify through your journey what had to happen in order to create that shift to go from, because that's significant. It's significant when you can take a less than optimal feeling, if you will, and that you feel for days versus you feel for hours. Like it's life changing. And this is the struggle that I have too is that, people get on the internet or on social media or whatever it is, and they start saying, well, you just gotta feel better. Like but people who are in that spot are like, what the fuck do I do that? Like, so I'm just,
I didn't think of that. Oh, I should feel better.
oh,
Thank you.
oh, wow. Okay, cool. Wow. Wisdom from a, so I don't know if you don't mind, like, I'd love to hear what it happened, because it sounds like it was a sticking point for you.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's been a gradual process. I mean, I have always been heavily attracted to, let's just call it the personal development world, the self-help world. I've been reading books and then, now listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos, for as long as any of those mediums have been around. I mean, when I graduated college, in the late 90s, I made it a goal to read 50 books a year. I figured I should be able to knock out one book a week on average. And I kept that pace up for almost a decade. And almost all of the books that I chose to read were underneath the personal development, self-help. So, you're talking Jim Rohn and Tony Robbins and Zig Ziglar and Brian Tracy and Les Brown, like kind of the godfathers of the self-development space. And I just would devour that stuff. And then, that would continue. And now you've kind of got this next wave of thought leaders and people like Ryan Holiday and Mel Robbins. And, there's just so many people out there that put out really good stuff. So I immersed my stuff in that. And I started to notice a lot of patterns to what most of them were sharing. So some of it was just kind of a gradual burn. But the biggest one, almost always with all of us, has to do with our environment. Specifically our relational environment and the people that we choose to be around. I slowly noticed that when I started investing more time with the types of people that lived an abundant life, then the more obvious that was to me that I was living a life of scarcity. When I would meet people, again, they saw the world through a lens of abundance. It wasn't just finances, which is usually what most people relegate it to, but it was a level of abundance. In every area of their life. And then I was like, man, it just feels good to be around these people. And it exposed where I was having a scarcity mindset. It's like if you happen to be watching this and you've been relatively sedentary as of late, you don't eat the healthiest of diets, you don't feel really good about how you look or how you feel. If you were to spend a few afternoons with people that were on the front of men's and women's health, doing so would immediately expose some of the habits and things that you probably need to improve. And I'm not suggesting that someone needs to do that, because I certainly wouldn't want you to do that and to feel worse about yourself. But when you hang around people that have a higher level of consciousness and a higher level of evolution and a higher level of habits and discipline, then it exposes in you the things that you need to improve. So for me, it was constantly hearing, reading, and watching these ideas, and then spending time with people that were living them before it finally started to click. And then it takes some humility, it takes vulnerability, and it takes a little bit of courage to have the self-awareness to look in the mirror and say, man, like the way I've been doing things is not working well. I need to make a change, and for me, it's that old adage of, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I found that constantly having a self-imposed limiting beliefs, and constantly looking at the world through the lens of scarcity, and constantly blaming and complaining and making excuses when things didn't go my way. Like, here's how I've been operating, and it just doesn't seem to be working, because I'm not fulfilled. I'm not happy. I'm constantly irritated. I'm not achieving at the level I think I should be. So at some point, I finally just said, man, if I keep doing it this way, I'm going to keep getting the same results. So I might as well make a switch. And some of that comes through maturity and life experience. Again, on one hand, we could all laugh and smile and say I was a little late to the party because it took me 40 years to figure some of these things out. But then at the same hand, I don't play the comparison game, because I promise you there could be an 80-year-old listening right now that still hasn't come to that conclusion. So I don't worry about playing the comparison game, and I don't worry about saying, oh, I wish I would have thought of these things in my 20s or 30s. I wasn't ready in my 20s or 30s.
Yeah, you wouldn't have gotten it.
Or awareness. No, I wouldn't have gotten it.
Yeah.
So it all happens when it's supposed to happen. And my only hope with having a conversation with someone like you at this time is that someone listening right now this is the exact time that they need to hear this to spark a change.
Yeah.
And I have the humility to know we're not going to change all of your listeners with one podcast, but maybe we'll change one.
That's all
maybe
it's
one
about.
person will hear one thing and their life will go in a slightly different direction because of the conversation we had. And if so, oh my gosh, my friend, that is a huge, huge win for us and massive progress for them.
Yeah. And it always has a ripple effect too, right? When one person finds change, there's always a ripple effect from that down the road, whether it's their kids, their friends, their neighbors, whatever. I'm curious, as you were talking there about scarcity mindset and the part about spending time with people who you want to be like, which I think is critical, right? They always say, I'll show you what your life looks like if you show me, your 5 people that you hang out with the most. So there's a challenge with finding new people, but also people with a scarcity. So I'm looking for some advice for you to give to the listener who's driving and going, yeah, okay, you're a public speaker or whatever, and you have access to these people, and you can take them out for dinner, but I'm whatever their story is, and they're driving along and they're going, I can't access people like that. What would be your advice for somebody to expand their network in an area that is more abundant?
Well, where I would have some slight pushback is, yes, I acknowledge that you might not be able to meet them in person or have dinner with them in person. But one of the beauties of the internet and social media in particular is we have way more access today than we've ever had at any point in our lives. So every single person I've just mentioned, you literally have an entire library of content that you can access and you can fully immerse yourself. I mean, many of these people that, I mentioned someone like Mel Robbins. I've never met Mel Robbins in person, and yet Mel Robbins and her work has had a very profound impact on the way I see the world. And one day, if I get an opportunity to share the stage with her or to meet her in person, I'll make sure that I tell her that. But that's an example of someone that I've never met, and yet I've still been able to learn from her. Because she has that type of content out in the forms of books and podcasts and articles and things like that. So that's a big shift. I mean, for context, I have twin sons that are 15 and I have a daughter that's almost 13. So they're in 9th and 7th grade. And, when I was their age, the primary way that you would get information would be to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, literally a giant, massive set of physical books. And you would have to look things up if you didn't know them. And that was just normal for me. Right now, my kids don't even know what the Encyclopedia Britannica is. And you know how they'd find out what it is? They'd Google what is the Encyclopedia Britannica, and within seconds, they'd be told what I just told you. So they have access to way more information than I had at that time. And that's a good thing. I mean, now with that, we have to be very responsible with that additional access, and we have to use it for good. So I would say have great discernment in who you choose to follow and who you choose to read, watch, and listen to, but the access is there. So you don't have to have dinner with someone in order to reap the benefits of their knowledge and their experience. It's out there. That is one of the reasons that I'm a speaker, that I'm an author, that I choose to be a podcast guest, is because I want to share these things openly. I want to pay forward all of the lessons that I've been so fortunate and so grateful to have learned. I've been able to sit in and watch workouts with someone like Kobe Bryant or Kevin Durant or Stephen Curry. And I'm very well aware that the overwhelming majority of the human population is not privy to those types of experiences. So I want to make sure that I'm taking the lessons from those and sharing them with as many people as possible. I want the impact of my message to have that ripple effect that you just mentioned. So, to me, and one of my kind of mantras that I try to live by is a compliment unshared is an act of selfishness. If you have something nice to say to someone and you don't say it, that's an act of selfishness. Well, very similar to that is if there's something that I know, why would I not openly share that and pay that forward? Why would I not want to write about that, speak about that, talk about that, share that, and pay that forward to others? That's going back to that life of abundance. I don't need to have a life of scarcity that, there's only a few good ideas out there and I need to hoard them for myself.
Right.
First of all, let's be honest. I'm only 50 years old and I'm in the leadership and performance space. Nothing that I'm sharing is an original idea or concept from me. all of this stuff has been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I mean, one of the main pillars of my belief is Stoicism.
Yes.
Stoicism has been around for thousands of years. None of this stuff is new. Now, the way I may choose to package it and share it, the way I internalize it through my own first world experiences will always be very unique to me. But these big pillar concepts and fundamentals, I'm not inventing any of this stuff. So all I can do is try to learn as much as I can, apply it to my own life, and then share what works to others. And that's where I feel a sense of contribution and significance. But none of this stuff is Alan Stein Jr. original material.
Yeah. It's thanks for sharing that piece about, because we've talked about on the podcast of finding mentors and, accessing people and yada, yada, yada. But it's interesting, as you were saying, about this whole piece on social media. And I don't want this to come off judgy, but, I think it's a really good example for people that if you need to go stream through your Instagram and see what your algorithms are presenting to you. It'll be a really good idea of where you sit in the space of drama or entertainment or whatever you're using that for. It's like, my Instagram is all pretty much motivational quotes, and it's all like finance or leadership stuff or workout stuff, because I love working out, but I don't get any of these like the Super Bowl. I don't think I got one feed dropped down from me, like from post Super Bowl drama or something like that. Other than Shaquan Barkley complimenting Taylor Swift and saying, like, I don't understand why she gets booed. So it's on the positive side, right? It's like, so if you're not feeding your mind with that stuff, it's a huge step forward. So it's a really great distinction. Thanks for sharing it. And I just want to make that point, guys. Like, what does your Instagram feeds or your X or whatever, what are they telling you? Because it will be pretty distinctive of the content that you consume is going to lead to your mindset in a lot of ways. And, to your point, Alan, reading the 50 books a year is, nobody does that anymore, hardly, or nobody ever did really do it. So hats off to you.
Yes, absolutely. And I love your point about we have to kind of weed the garden. And I do all of the time. I go through each of the different platforms that I'm active on, and I look at people that I'm following, and I choose to follow a relatively small amount of people, but I make sure that the people I'm following are adding value to my life. They're either adding value from a mental standpoint of they're teaching me things that are helpful. They're adding value from an emotional standpoint. They're sharing things that are uplifting and inspirational. And as soon as I start to notice a trend that someone is posting things that are negative or gossipy or not adding value to my life, then I simply unfollow them. And then I try to make sure that I live on the other side of that to the same standard. I try to make sure that everything that I post would be of value to someone. Now, I can't make everything I post of value to everyone, but I want to make sure that what I'm posting, there is some subset of the population that would look at that and find value in that. So I might make a post about a parenting lesson, and yeah, obviously only other parents are going to find that valuable, but that is a subset of a group that the only reason I'm posting it is to add value to someone else. So yeah, we have to look at what we consume through the same lens as we do for our own physical health and wellness and well-being. I mean, whether you choose to eat clean or not is a personal decision, but most people will acknowledge that if your diet is primarily processed foods and fast food, that's not the healthiest diet to eat for health, longevity, and performance. Again, if you choose to eat those things, no judgment from me, but most people know that. Most people say, hey, if I want to look and feel a certain way, then I need to eat a certain diet and I need to move my body. Well, we just have to remember the same is true mentally. If you want to have a certain mindset, a winner's mindset, a champion's mindset, then you have to be very careful about what you feed your mind, and it's input versus output. There's no way that you can consistently read, watch, and listen to things that are gossipy, that are negative, that are shock and awe, and then turn around and have an uplifting, empowering type mindset. It would just be impossible. So for me, I choose uh, not to read or watch conventional news, because it's, for me, most of the time the news skews towards the negative. Um, and I'm an informed citizen. Like, I make sure that I have resources that keep me informed, but I just choose to siphon off certain things,
Where you get it from.
because I found they debilitate my mindset. And
Yeah.
that's, once again, that's not to judge any of those mediums. We all have to find what's right for us. But I encourage everyone to go through, as you just said so perfectly, go through each of the platforms that you're active and weed out the folks that aren't adding value or lifting you up. And this doesn't mean put your head in the sand. You can still be informed and be a realist, but you don't have to have this tidal wave of stuff that's negative over and over and over. It would be the same as constantly eating fast food and then wondering why you don't have the body that you'd like. Well, it's input versus output. So if you want better outputs, you need to change your inputs.
Yeah, I love it. I love that, man. You had mentioned earlier about, and I don't want to miss this and get into it like a 2-hour conversation, and then it's like we jam it in at the end. So I think there's a lot of value. You'd mentioned, you've spent some time with some elite athletes and how they perform, and taking away some of the lessons that you've learned through that. I'd love to kind of hear some things, some of the most relevant things that you think are, probably, I guess, actually, I don't want to pre-frame it. So yeah, just what are the most relevant things that you've kind of walked away with?
There's three. There's probably a list of about a dozen. We could call them traits. We could call them mindsets, approaches, perspectives, philosophies that I noticed from the highest performers in basketball. I noticed them from the elite coaches. I noticed them from the elite players. And then when I made the leap over to the corporate space and I started working with corporate audiences and executives and sales professionals and entrepreneurs, I started to notice the exact same traits would pop up. So it was kind of cool that between basketball and business, that the set of fundamentals that actually led to being a high performer had such high utility that they were very similar in both. But despite being about a dozen, there's three in particular that I think are the most impactful. And then these are the same three that I choose to use as the foundation to this new operating system that we've already discussed. And I'll give you just kind of an overview of the three, and then you pull on whichever threads you'd like to talk more about.
Amazing.
The very first one was the lesson that I learned directly from Kobe Bryant in 2007. And that lesson was the best never get bored with the basics. That if you want to be elite in any area of your life, you need to focus on the fundamentals, get back to the basics, and simplify success. You need to untether from things that are unnecessarily complex. So, and this applies to everything. This applies to your financial life, your romantic life, your physical fitness, all of this stuff. Don't make things any more complex than they need to be. Figure out what the basics are and work towards mastery of those primarily during the unseen hours. So number one is learning how to focus on the fundamentals. Number two is learning how to blend confidence with humility. You earn the right to be confident in any area of your life by putting in the work, by demonstrated performance, by your self-talk. Like, you earn the right to be confident, but you always need to make sure that you brush that confidence with a stroke of humility, because it's humility that is what will allow you to stay open to feedback. Humility is what will allow you to stay open to being coached. Humility is what will remind you that no matter how good you get in a certain area, you can still get better. That you're not there to play the comparison game. You're not there to say, hey, I'm the best player on my team. You're there to say, I can still get better as a player. It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. They're not the yardstick. I'm the yardstick. So earning the right to be confident, but still remaining humble and blending those two things together, I found that the highest performers in the world do that masterfully. And then the third one is high performers in basketball and business are crystal clear on their North Star, but they focus more on the process. Once they've established and gotten clear on whatever their goal may be, they don't focus on the goal. They focus on what's right in front of them. They focus on the next actionable step they can take. They focus on the process. And the best analogy I can think of is, if you were ever asked to build a brick wall, don't spend all of your time thinking about the wall. Spend your time focused on the bricks. Spend your time focused on laying each brick with care and precision. Lay each brick exactly where it needs to go. And if you do that, Well, the wall will just take care of itself. You don't have to worry about the wall if you learn to focus on the bricks. So those are the three foundational pillars right now of my operating system. And as I said earlier, this is very holistic. It's how I view being a parent. It's how I view being a speaker and a business owner. It's how I view past and future romantic relationships. It's how I view my physical fitness and my wellness. I try to make sure that I'm looking at looking at it through the lens of all three of those pillars.
You said it earlier in the conversation. You were like, you don't you're not sharing anything that hasn't already been around for, dozens, hundreds, or if not thousands of years, especially when you go back to Stoicism and, Marcus Aurelius and all those guys, right? And these are, I'm just going to repeat for the audience, and then, do the best, do the basics, earn the right to be confident, but maintain humility, and crystal clear on your vision, but focus on the process.
You nailed it.